Hello, listeners. This is Kat. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of The Itch. This will be Part 2, Chapter 2. Aizawa sat with his head in his hands, feeling the mother of all migraines popping up and refusing to abate as he went over the past couple of days and what he was supposed to do now. As of yesterday, Midoriya had finished his individual exam with flying colors and was on standby to see whether or not Aizawa would be allowing him to go on the training camp trip. And the day before that, 14 hours after Midoriya had to be sedated, he woke up with no memory at all of what had transpired after the exam started. "Do you remember anything? Anything at all?" Recovery Girl asked, somewhat worried by the fact. Midoriya sat in the bed, frowning at the sheets, for the longest time before shaking his head no. "I really don't," he replied earnestly. "I mean, I was nervous, yeah, but—" Nervousness didn't put someone into a psychotic rage, Aizawa thought as he listened in. He had rewatched the footage from the start of Midoriya's exam and saw that everything had gone to shit after Bakugo had hit him. Recovery Girl had already ruled out a grand mal seizure, for the most part, so indeed a psychotic fit was all that was left to go by. What worried them most was Midoriya's actions before and after being touched, with the boy looking like he was trying to escape something and fighting for his life when he couldn't. And after all of that, he didn't remember anything, and didn't appear to be suffering anything more than a loss of recollection at that brief moment of time. Aizawa watched the footage several times over, keeping a keen eye out for any details. Nothing much was out of the ordinary, Midoriya being a ball of nerves from both the exam and being paired with Bakugo being his usual rabid lone wolf self, and Midoriya seeming to try to talk some sense into the other boy before being violently rejected. It was like a switch had been flipped right after, in a way that Aizawa definitely did not even see from the first mock battle when Bakugo did much more than hit the boy in the face. Midoriya had mentally shut down, going purely on fight or flight. And he was scratching himself a lot. Aizawa frowned as he watched through another time, seeing Midoriya using the street asphalt as a means to scratch at his face and body, using his hands when that didn't do much. His heaving and retching in between crawls, not reacting to anyone's voices, and losing his mind when touched made Aizawa think of a massive overreaction to anxiety. He went back to watch again, seeing that Midoriya's hands unconsciously went to his chest as he pursued Bakugo, probably to scratch then too. Anxiety that took a swan dive into psychotic mayhem with one hit. This wasn't something that just happened to occur. This was something that was long built up, festering until it emerged as a mental breakdown. Most concerning was how Midoriya just didn't remember anything, and now didn't appear to have any lingering effects. Yet, his instincts warned him, there were other factors at play, most specifically concerning Bakugo. Bakugo had been the one to trigger this fit, and Bakugo was the only constant in Midoriya's past to build up on the mental fatigue. It put Aizawa's teeth on edge, and a lead of guilt in his gut, thinking that he was doing them a favor in making them work through whatever animosity it was for the exam, when in reality he had put an open flame next to a leaking sack of gunpowder. This wasn't a rivalry. Rivalries weren't one-sided, and upon looking for the umpteenth time, from both the exam start and the mock battle from before, abusive. There was no other way to really describe it. Katsuki Bakugo was behaving absolutely abusively toward Midoriya. If this happened now, it was certain to happen again. One didn't just have a psychotic breakdown and move on without further incident or mental scars. Midoriya had simply compartmentalized the incident away, and would be in need of real psychiatric help. But for now, he already informed the class that everyone was going to the training camp with Sero, Ashido, Kaminari, Sato, and Kirishima attending the extra lessons as well. It would do no good to keep Midoriya from improving himself, but now he had to fit in specialization for the boy in case he had another fit. At the moment, training his body to better house his strength would take precedence over combat. That way someone coming at him on the offensive wouldn't trigger another attack. Tiger was an intimidating powerhouse, but he was also a rescue hero who could make himself non-threatening if need be. Still, Aizawa was teetering on the edge of bringing Ryo Inui with him as backup, as a guidance counselor. The man was oddly gifted with knowing which students were on the verge of panic attacks, even in a crowd. He would be able to sense when something was up, before anyone, and give a sign to clear the area. Any further incident, however, and Midoriya would be sent back home immediately. It was bad enough that Mrs. Midoriya was already a worried mess. While she had been advised against watching the footage, she insisted upon it and had been horrified at what she saw, made even worse that her son didn't remember a thing about it and insisted that he was fine. Midoriya himself did not see it for fear of triggering whatever it was again. The ones who had watched in the observation room were forbidden from discussing it by Aizawa and Recovery Girl, though Aizawa saw flashes of mutiny on more than one face, most notably Todoroki. The boy looked positively murderous at the mention of Bakugo, and Aizawa found himself surreptitiously guiding Bakugo away entirely from the rest of the class just to avoid that sort of encounter. When Aizawa told the class that Midoriya was awake and unaware of what happened, he saw Todoroki visibly heave a sigh of relief. Soon after, he saw Todoroki and Ida having a quiet conversation alone, where Todoroki looked almost pleading, while Ida was reassuring. Aizawa didn't know what it was the boys were talking about, and he didn't want to intrude on it when it seemed all was well. Midoriya would be back in class after the summer break, though Aizawa already had a change of seat in mind, having already asked Aoyama to change seats with Midoriya. Aoyama was oddly serious and silent, as he agreed and went on his way to get ready for the trip. When everyone was filed out, Aizawa decided to take the time to figure things out on his end, praying nothing else would go wrong between now and the camp trip. Midoriya had told a small fib when asked about the supposed experience during the exam. He did remember something. Itching. At first thought, it didn't seem like something that important to bring up. But the more Midoriya thought about it, the more it sort of ate at him, recalling back in the past with little detail of recollection of the actual memory, except that he itched. And the more he thought about it now, the more he realized that the mental barrier he'd put around that particular tick was almost non-existent. And when he thought about his past, thought about what he had supposedly done in the exam, he found himself scratching at his chest through his shirt. And he thought about it a lot. Still, he didn't want to stay away from his schoolwork. He didn't want to be punished for something he didn't even remember doing, and if he did have a mental setback, he didn't want to be cowed by it. He wanted to overcome it. It was why, when Uraraka extended the invite to go to the mall with the bulk of the class to shop for things they needed for the training camp, he accepted right away. In hindsight, his mother deserved better than a text telling her where he was going to be when he was meant to be recovering at home, but he felt too desperate for some semblance of normalcy for much else. He grabbed the short train ride into the city and made it to the rendezvous point where he saw his classmates hurrying up with a wave. "Hey!" he called over. "I'm here." And right away, though he received some smiles back, he knew that his presence was not a good one in the group. Uraraka's smile was too strained. Ida wouldn't look him in the eye. Tokiyami was keeping a definite distance from him, eyeing him almost warily. Even Kirishima's ever-present friendliness didn't quite reach his eyes. Discomfort hung over them like a miasma that made Midoriya itch. No, not now. Not here with his friends. Hagakure, to her credit, at least tried to pep everyone up, calling out for who needed what and where they had to go, and to meet back at 3 for group lunch. That seemed to backfire on Midoriya's behalf when everyone began partying out in pairs of teams, leaving him with Uraraka. He turned to her, at least trying to salvage his day. "Everyone sure left in a hurry," he remarked, trying to keep his voice light and his hands from touching at his itching skin. Uraraka nodded a little, shifting her bag straps. "Yeah," she replied half-heartedly. Midoriya's skin was crawling. "Do you need anything close by?" he asked, unable to stop his hand from scratching lightly at his abdomen. "I mean, there's a bug spray!" Uraraka yelped suddenly, turning to a random direction. "I need bug spray!" She hurried off, leaving Midoriya alone, and almost in agony with the itching. His hands shook, feeling a familiar lump in his throat that was always connected to his crying. This time, it being exacerbated with the goddamn awful itching that came with being invited, only to be abandoned. He swallowed back his tears, fought back the incessant static that began clouding at his peripheral as he nearly curled into himself, fingers trailing to his collarbone to scratch. Freak. Useless. Worthless. Deku. He could feel the swell in his throat cut off, his air, the static getting worse as his vision began to blur and the itching grow worse. He felt the entire world was looking at him through a microscope, yet he felt like he was not even real, like nobody could see him, see his suffering. "Please," he whimpered under his breath, close to hyperventilating in the middle of the mall. Would anyone see him before he died of asphyxiation? Would anyone help? Would anyone care? The itching was getting worse, and his fingertips began to feel damp, his vision close to black. And then he felt someone physically move his body, half walking, half dragging it out from the middle of the walkway to an out-of-the-way hallway that led to an emergency exit. The enclosed space somehow feeling like he had been pulled into an open valley full of more breathing space, all before he dropped to his knees, gasping for breath and scratching even worse at his chest. "Easy," came a soft, rough voice that cut through the static in his brain, the voice being accompanied by a hand clasping over his fingers to halt their scratching. He whined, tugging at his hand, but the cold hand around his own didn't give. "Curl your fingertips in," the voice said, using his own fingers to physically move Midoriya's fingertips inward. "Use the blunt of your nails if you're going to scratch that much. Saves you a mess." Midoriya absently took the unsolicited advice, desperate for anything just to get relief from the itching at least a little. He slumped down to the floor, leaning his head forward to try to control his breathing as he continued to scratch with the blunt of his nails, still getting the sensation of momentary relief without the excess tearing. Being uninterrupted from his scratching cleared his head a little, making him aware that he was sitting on the floor in the emergency exit hallway, away from the crowd that wasn't giving him so much as a second look. Possibly because of the bigger person dressed in black sitting between him and the sight of others, almost shielding him from view. Midoriya swallowed hard, finally making some of that lump in his throat go away as he peered to the side, looking at the figure from behind his hair. Familiar red eyes stared back at him from beneath a hoodie, being framed by pale blue hair. Even in his half-panicked state, Midoriya knew who it was, and yet still couldn't find it in himself to give even half of a damn. "So this is how I die," he thought to himself, having a nervous breakdown in the mall and crumbled into flesh chunks in an emergency exit hallway. It would be long after 3 o'clock that anyone would notice he was missing, dead and in the janitor's cleanup bucket. The depressing thought did no favors for the itching, making him stare down at his scratching hand and noting smears of blood on his fingertips. He let out a soft sob, clenching his eyes shut and leaning his head back against the wall. "Stop," he hissed to himself between his clenched teeth. "Stop, please. Stop the itching, please." His fingernail caught his flesh, tearing a scratch open again. "Stop!" Shigaraki's hand, pushing his head back down, broke off his mantra. "Breathe," the man ordered. "Fixing the itch comes later." Midoriya didn't quite know what Shigaraki was talking about, but it made enough sense to listen, and he ignored what his hands were doing, and instead focused on breathing. Ignore his hands. Ignore the crowd just meters away. Ignore the literal villain next to him. Just breathe. 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 He took a deep breath in and let it out, the static in his brain clearing and shoulder slumping as he repeated it again, aware enough now that he was still itching, but not as overwhelmingly so, his fingers curling to the blunt again to avoid hurting himself so badly. Breathe. And so he did. His fingers slowed to a near-lazy crawl over his chest as he let out a shaky sigh and swallowed past his dry mouth. "Okay," he said, mostly speaking to himself. "Okay, I'm okay. I'm okay." The hand that never left his head, after leaning it forward, gave something akin to a ruffle to his hair before receding. Shigaraki tucking his hand into his hoodie pocket to join his other. The villain was contemplatively silent for the longest time as he eyed Midoriya over with a shrewd yet thoughtful look. Something like fate or destiny or any of that crap. Shigaraki thought that he had come to this mall just to clear his scrambled thoughts and instead caught sight of the damn green-haired kid that was in the top 5 spot of his shit list. His initial idea, to go and talk to the boy, perhaps get a word or two in while making a declaration of death, was shattered when he saw the boy suddenly slip into a state that was far too familiar for Shigaraki to find comfortable even looking at. Shigaraki saw deep, internal loathing cloud the boy's eyes, a panic blind to everything around him, close him off to the outside world, and then came the excoriation. It was a gesture so familiar that Shigaraki felt it was almost unique to him and him alone, and yet Midoriya was doing it. The boy had that very same itch. He could tell. He knew. There was something Midoriya wanted to do, wanted to say, wanted to hurt, to destroy. And it was buried so deep down the only way else to get it out was to claw it out. Out of all of UA's finest, Shigaraki didn't expect this all-might wannabe self-sacrificing heroling to be the one to have that very same itch that he himself had. You never really know with the goody-goody types, he thought, eyes narrowing as he watched the boy settle himself down. He wasn't a fool, though. While Midoriya's face and body were relaxing, Shigaraki could see it in the boy's viridian eyes that the itch was still there. And from personal experience, it wouldn't go away until what caused it would go away. "Who hurt you, Izuku Midoriya?" he found himself murmuring, only knowing that he did so out loud when Midoriya looked at him, a mild confusion clouding the haunted gleam in his eyes. "Too many," Midoriya replied. I hate it so much." His eyes filled with tears, his scratching quickening. I thought it stopped, but then Kachan, he swallowed hard, feeling a slight retch coil up in his chest as the vaguest shadow of a memory began unearthing itself. What did I do wrong? His itching worsened. Breathe, Shigaraki flippantly reminded, his eyes staring unblinking at the boy's shaking form. You're talking about Katsuki Bakugo, yeah? Midoriya nodded, clenching his eyes shut, as he mentally beat the memory back with a shovel. It was him. No one will tell me what I did. No one will talk to me. They invited me here just to ditch me. He scratched harder, tears streaming down his face. What did I do? What did I do? What did I do? Breathe. Shigaraki slipped his hand out of his hoodie pocket to push Midoriya's head down again. 10 words or less between breaths. Midoriya took several breaths before his scratching slowed again. He was quiet for some time before peering out from the corner of his eye. Why are you doing this? He finally asked, sounding much younger than he was. Shigaraki sucked his teeth, scowling at himself as though that thought had just occurred to him as well. Hell if I know, he muttered, his other hand reaching up to lightly scrape his fingernails against his scarred neck. But it isn't every day I see someone like me. He paused for the inevitable retort of, I'm nothing like you, but it never came. Midoriya lapsed into his own silence, his hands finally stilling over his collarbone before they dropped into his lap. Does it ever stop? He asked quietly. He felt Shigaraki's hand flex slightly in his hair. Not until what caused it is gone, Shigaraki replied bitterly. Take it from someone who's been itching for 15 years. It's hell. Pure, unbridled hell. He looked down at Midoriya, eyes almost red ice. Do you know the hell I must feel then, Midoriya, as someone who hates everything and wants everything to disappear? Midoriya's eyes filled with tears again. Agony, he answered. That it'll never go away. His hands twitched again, and he felt 4 Shigaraki's 5 fingernails flex into his scalp. That's right, Shigaraki said quietly. Agonizing hell. And here you are, one small finger away from being one less thing in the world I hate gone. What will you do about it? Midoriya was silent, the tension in his shoulders almost making him like stone before he finally slumped, something in his eyes dying. It would make the itching stop, wouldn't it? He said, his voice thick with bitterness and bile. No one would notice I was gone until a janitor or something found me. Before you came, and no one. His breath hitched. They brought me here and left me. And then no one saw me. No one helped. He buried his face in his hands. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know what I did wrong. I just hurt an itch, and I just... You want to hurt him. Shigaraki's fingernails let go of Midoriya's scalp, his eyes softening into something a little more thoughtful. That's it, isn't it? That hot-headed brat. I'll bet he's an old childhood playmate, isn't he? And that this isn't something new and recent that he's done, huh? He leaned in closer, smiling. You itch because he's under your skin, because he hurt you and no one stopped him. Well, let me tell you, Izuku Midoriya. He made sure Midoriya was listening. No one will stop him. No one did before, and no one ever will, until you stop him yourself. Midoriya looked at him, eyes confused but intrigued. What? And anyone else who feels like they can hurt you. Shigaraki continued, his hand lightly ruffling at Midoriya's hair. I know that with your disposition, it's not just Bakugo who thinks they can walk all over you. Anyone who hurts you will crawl under your skin and irritate the shit out of it until you make them stop. Red locked onto green, completely serious. They won't tell you what you did, because they know what you can do if they get under your skin. Why would they have any reason to fear you if they did nothing wrong, Did they stop Bakugo from hurting you before? No? Then they won't ever. His smile widened, half-healed wounds on his lips cracking open again. Plenty have gotten under my skin, Midoriya, and I would be a pile of scratched-up flesh ribbons if I didn't make the itching they caused go away. He ruffled Midoriya's hair again, before withdrawing his hand and standing up, staring down at Midoriya. Of course, that's all up to you, he said with a shrug. I've only had 15 years to know what I'm talking about, but Because I know just how hellish it is. And that I'm not that garbage of a person to just let you suffer as I do. His expression went calculated for a moment. When you feel you want to make the itching stop, go to the mountain. He didn't give Midoriya a chance to ask what he meant before turning and walking off into the crowd, easily vanishing within it from view. Midoriya remained where he was for the longest time, mulling over everything before taking out a cell phone and with shaking hands and sending a message to his class group chat. Not feeling up for it today. Heading home. He stood up and walked out of the mall in silence. Not one person noticed his scratched-up chest and bloody shirt, and even if they did, no one stopped to see if he was okay or if they could help. No one. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 2 of The Itch. Chapter 3 will be next. Let me know your all's thoughts and reactions, and as always, thank you so much for listening.